Welcome everyone to this drop-in session to cover Vigor ACS. This is a session where we're going to cover the basic operation of adding devices into Vigor ACS and managing the devices. We'll be using our cloud offering of Vigor ACS, so anyone who has access to that will be familiar with the setup. And covered all the key features, adding devices into ACS. We're talking about routers, switches, access points, how to maintain those devices, how to view the logs and view alarms of each device, how to maintain the devices by doing configuration backups and firmware upgrades as well. So firstly, just want to mention about the GoToWebinar tool that we're using today. There is a chat section at the bottom of the screen where you will have the option to put forward your questions that you might have. We do have members of the team that are monitoring those, and towards the end of the actual session, we'll collate those and we will answer those questions accordingly. For any questions we don't get round to, we will email the answers back to you individually as well. So just to cover what Vigor ACS is. Vigor ACS, ACS standing for Automatic Configuration Server. This is DrayTek's management platform. We can manage all DrayTek devices that are in the current range, and a lot of our legacy estate as well. We can also manage those. The types of devices that we can manage are the DrayTek routers, DrayTek switches, access points, and our latest modem that we have, the Vigor 167. This is also a device now that can be managed by our ACS. Great addition. Typically, you would have to be at site to be rebooting a modem or to do a firmware upgrade on the devices. But now with the option of managing these modems in ACS, we can do all of this remotely. The devices, they will communicate with the Vigor ACS server using the TR069 management protocol. They will either connect to a cloud-hosted solution or a self-install of Vigor ACS. In terms of connectivity, these devices will route to the ACS server that you've specified, and ACS will be able to manage those. On the bottom right there, I highlight a image of the devices being managed by mobile connectivity. Often with mobile connectivity, you will get a non-routable public IP address. It's often behind a layer of carrier-grade NAT, so managing these devices is often very difficult. Utilizing ACS, ACS can still fully manage these devices. The ACS server acts as a stun server and is able to manage any devices behind a layer of NAT, whether that be, in this example, the mobile connectivity there, or the switch or access point behind the local network. Let's cover some key benefits of what ACS can provide. Essentially, you're getting full visibility and control of your DrayTek estate. You can monitor the overall bandwidth usage per network, per site, break it down to each individual WAN interface, and we can delve into which client at that local site is generating the traffic as well. The DrayTek devices will poll in by default every 15 minutes, but this is something you can change if you have a self-hosted environment. If the devices no longer poll into the server, Vigor ACS will generate offline alarms. Now, this is if the device is not contactable at all, or if there's multiple WAN connections, each individual WAN interface, a notification can be raised for when these individual WAN interfaces go down. Additionally, for VPN and also events that happen locally on the CPE as well. In terms of maintenance, Vigor ACS offers the ability to apply firmware upgrades. Firmware upgrades would require the device to reboot, so having the option to schedule these firmware upgrades for a time that will not affect the actual site is very beneficial. The Vigor ACS server can also store any configuration backups that you wish to take and restore them at a later date as well. In terms of reports, Vigor ACS can generate reports on the devices. We can create templates of what these reports are and have these emailed at a specified frequency to any number of email addresses that you specify as well. And a very key part of Vigor ACS is the provisioning aspect. So we can change any configuration on any device, whether it's one device at a time, as if you were logged directly into the unit, or we can create profiles and push these profiles out to multiple devices or a whole network. Vigor ACS does also offer some auto provisioning capability for zero-touch deployment, but this is typically a setup that would require the self-hosted solution that we'd recommend. Okay, just to review the agenda for this session, we're going to be looking at registering DrayTek routers, DrayTek switches, and DrayTek access points to Vigor ACS. We'll also look at, once those devices are in ACS, how we can manage the devices, the type of information that we can pull off, and the navigation of the ACS platform. We'll also look at the monitoring options that we have across the networks and the individual devices. And we'll run through taking configuration backups and applying firmware upgrades. So to begin with, let's look at adding some DrayTek devices. First of all, we'll focus on the DrayTek router. The DrayTek router here being the 2865 LAC model, our multi-WAN connectivity device. This is a device that we can see currently at the moment is connected over the WAN 2 interface. And this is the WAN interface that we use for registering to the Vigor ACS server. Within the router, we'll have the system maintenance and TR069 menu. Here is where we apply any of the configuration we need to specify for registration to the server. I mentioned about the devices that actually support management from Vigor ACS. As long as the device has this TR069 menu, then we're able to apply that configuration. Some legacy devices might not support the later TLS standards, so we'll need to just contact support just to get more information on which models you can actually add if you have a legacy estate. So the first part of the TR069 configuration we need to do on the top left is the enable TR069. So this is enabling the management protocol. The second option there, enable HTTP compression. This is quite a recent addition to some of the newer models like 2865 and later firmware. If you do enable that, that feature will only work with Vigor ACS versions of 3.1 40 or above. So for the current cloud version that you're using, do not apply that option. It will not allow for the device to be managed from ACS. The ACS server on option is by default left as internet. This essentially means any available WAN connection that is on the device will use that interface. This is useful if you have multiple WAN connections and you have some failover configuration in place. If the WAN interface drops and perhaps a backup LTE connection comes back up online, this internet option will work with any of those WAN interfaces. The URL is where we actually specify the server that we want to connect to. There's a wizard option on the right-hand side of that. Pressing that button will allow you to specify either HTTP or HTTPS. We'd recommend that all the traffic being sent from the CPE to the ACS server is using HTTPS. You'd specify the host, so that would be either an IP address or a host name there. And then it will populate the handler at the end of the host name that you specify. The username and password is very important because this is what specifies the authentication to the ACS server and which network that the device will populate into for future management. The stun settings, that needs to be enabled should the device not have a routable IP address and if it's behind a layer of NAT. So this particular device here was behind on a NATed IP address, so we require to enable the stun settings there. Once you do that, on the most recent firmwares, the server address will be pre-populated there. It will just pull off the host name of the server or the IP address that you've specified. That's the only information that needs to go into that server address. And leave the stun port as default that the server is actually using. And on the very bottom of the screen there, we can see the actual status. The status will actually change to a live status with that green icon, showing that connection was successful with the settings applied. Just for some troubleshooting information here, if we actually change the screen here, we can see that there's an error message here. Please check your internet connection or ACS URL setting. So this is one example of an error message that you might come across. If we look at the URL, the URL will slightly change there. It was previously c2.draytek.co.uk, our cloud premium server. You can see there the URL doesn't have the correct address. So that's why the error message applied. This is another error that you might come across, an 401 unauthorized message. Here you can see that the URL has been reinstated correctly, but the actual username is now incorrect. Username and password is not matching what's applied to the actual network in Vigor ACS. If we return the username to be the correct username, so I've just added the additional A character there, that's the device now back into the ACS server. So obviously important to get this stage right so that the device actually registers into the ACS server correctly. So hopefully you should now see the Vigor ACS server itself. So we'll lock into this ACS server. And here is our interface for Vigor ACS. When you first log in, you're brought to the landing page, which is the root level network that you have access to. and the network dashboard for that network. So I'm just going to expand on the top left here, information of this. My login is associated with this root level network, my C2 DrayTek demo network, and we can see that there's 8 devices in total registered within this network. The way that I've structured this demo environment, created multiple networks here, and we can see the number of devices that are registered in each network, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. In terms of how the device is registering and which network it's registering to, let's go to the network management section. And these are the settings that we have. So when you first go into this, the focus will be on the root level network. And the root level network will have the general settings, which will be the name, username and password. So this is the key part about authenticating the device to the correct network. As we expand this, we can see the additional networks that have been created. To create different networks, select the network that you want to put the new network under. We have the add network option. Give that a name. So I'm going to call this company D. The username will need to be unique for the networks that are on the ACS platform. So if I gave an example here, I know this is a username that's already been used for the company A network. Oh, it was slightly different. Company A there, and this one was company _A. Yeah. Username already exists, please use another one. So you're not going to have a conflict there. ACS will prevent that happening, but you do need to have every network to be unique in terms of username and password. So this is the network that we'll focus on, username and password there. And in this network, we're going to actually have some devices. So let's have a look at the actual devices that we have on this particular network. This is a 2865 LAC that's registered into Vigor ACS. ACS is able to communicate back. A good tip to advise of is look for the uptime. The uptime here is a dynamic value. So ACS will receive information from the device on every inform, periodic inform, every 15 minutes. That is a setting that you specify in that TR069 menu page. Enable that 900 seconds, every 15 minutes the device will poll in. Key information of the device will be provided about the router model, the router firmware, and additional information from the site like WAN traffic. If ACS can communicate back, ACS can pull off information from the site, including dynamic data like the uptime. So it's a good tip to actually always check for the uptime on the device. Good example here of a device that's being managed, 2865. We can see the firmware version. We can see the uptime of this device. It does have a DSL connection. The orange icon here provides information that it's an ADSL connection rather than VDSL. And we can actually see the sync speeds available to that site. We have on the right-hand side, information of the WAN overview. So this is the total amount of WAN traffic, and we can see per individual WAN interface as well, the amount of traffic that's been generated. We've got a summary here of the actual IP addresses for each internet connection that's available at site. We can see, because it's a LAC model, AC beam wireless. It does support wireless, but we can see currently the wireless is disabled on each of the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz radio. Should any clients be connected, you'll be able to see how many clients are connected and to which SSID that they're connected to as well in the station list below. This model supports 4 SSIDs per radio, so we can see SSID 1 is enabled, but the actual radio itself is disabled there. LTE information and overall view of the activity at the site and the setup at the site. So we can see the configuration of the router. This router supports up to 8 LAN subnets. Only LAN 1 is currently enabled, and we can see the IP address as well. The dashboard does give some quick tool options, so we can do backup configuration files, which we'll talk about more in a moment. We can restore the last configuration that was saved by ACS onto the device, and we can download the last configuration as well that ACS has stored. We also have a reboot now option for rebooting that device as well. In terms of the additional devices that you can add to Vigor ACS, we can also add the switches and access points to ACS as well. On this particular router here, behind this router, we have a switch as well. So this is one of DrayTek's gigabit 24-port switches. And we can see the actual number of ports in use, so it's very useful to actually get information and manage this switch as well. Key setup of the configuration when doing the TR069 management of the switch or the access point is to ensure that you'll have stun enabled, like we did on the router. This is to ensure that ACS is able to communicate back to that device. The device will register successfully without the stun, but for ACS to be able to communicate back, because it's behind a layer of NAT, we need to enable that stun configuration. So what we'll focus on now is the actual monitoring side of ACS as well. If we go back to one of these routers here, we'll do a configuration change and we'll see what we can see from ACS of any activity that happens with that. So the device I'll select is, let's look at this 2865 LAC. The dashboard that you load up, whether it be a network or a CPE dashboard, will provide different menu options on the left-hand side. It's typically the top left section here. The divider here on the icons, these are the system tools. So these will be static. These won't change, but the menus on the top left will change depending if your focus is currently on a CPE, customer premise equipment, whether it be router, switch or access point, or a network. That will change. The current focus we've got now is the CPE. So these are the configuration options that we have. So we can make a configuration change on this device here. So configuration change that we might want to apply, let's enable the wireless on this device. We know that both radios are currently disabled, so we've got 2.4 and 5 gigahertz control at the top. So we'll just enable the wireless on this. And we'll hit save. Hit save will apply any configuration that you've applied here. And we can see ACS is responding with parameter set complete. We'll take a look into the monitoring. screen reloads after a certain amount of time when you apply these configurations. So we go into monitoring, we'll go into logs. We can see here at 11:24, Vigor ACS has got entry in the all CPE actions log. This is the default log menu that you receive. All CPE actions here, whether it be configuration change, reboot, device first registering with its first inform, all activity will be shown in this log here. We can either click on that log entry there, or we can get a little bit more detail if we go into the set parameter log menu. And we can see that there was a manual configuration change, and that's the change that we just applied just a moment ago. We can also see the username and the status. If we click on that, we can see the actual device MAC address, IP address, time of the event, and how many changes were applied. So it was just one change in that example. We could have changed multiple things like the wireless channel as well on that configuration screen. And on hitting save, the specified configuration and multiple parameters would be specified. Here we can see it was a successful change, and the value that we changed to was true to enable wireless LAN. These logs display the actual TR069 parameter that the ACS is changing, and this is how ACS manages the devices. All configuration has an associated parameter, in this case the wireless LAN. Go back to the dashboard, we should see that that has now been enabled. Yeah, wireless LAN 2.4 gigahertz is enabled, and small change in the information here. Instead of being grayed out, we can see SSID 1 is actually green because that SSID is enabled as well. If we go back to the logs, let's have a look at some additional information that we could see. Let's look at file transfer. We can see that there's attempts of file transfers, whether it be a firmware upgrade, firmware backup, firmware restore. We can do filters here. We can filter through if the status of those transfers, whether it's success, fail, or processing. We can see currently the last packet that was attempted on this device was a fail, so we can investigate why that might have been. Syslog is available. ACS can act as a syslog server, but this is not something that we enable on the cloud environment. CPE notify is very useful logging information. This is completed on the configuration of the router. So just to highlight where this is. Under system maintenance, TR069 configuration. This is the setup that we have for pointing to the actual ACS server. We also have a reporting configuration option. This allows any activity that happens on the device, whether it's locally on the LAN side or any remote management of the device, whether it be logging into the UI or access to the SSH command line. All this activity can be reported back to Vigor ACS within those periodic informs. So let's have a look at any activity that's happened on this device. We can see different types. On the right hand side, we've got web login, we've got web changes. We can see the IP address that the source IP address was from for the access to the router, and we can see that there was one failed attempt, but then it was successful. We can see any web change, so any user logging into Vigor ACS and making a configuration change onto the CPE, and making a configuration change. The menu that configuration change was applied is reported back. So we've got system maintenance TR069 setting there. Very useful to understand if a site is suddenly experiencing some issues. We can see if any recent change was actually applied, any new firewall rules, any change in the LAN setup. The username that was used to access these routers was admin. DrayTek routers with the recent firmware, you can actually change the username to be something else other than admin. Also, if you've got external authentication, multiple users that could access to the device, the username that was used at that time will be displayed as well. Here we've got some examples of SSH access to the router. We can actually see as well the actual command that was applied on the device. That's reported back to ACS. And we can see here there's been multiple attempts of accessing this router via SSH and failed attempts. We see the source IP addresses, different IP addresses there. This is actually a regular occurrence on this router. This is obviously a way to actually identify if someone's actually trying to brute force the router. So this is something that we could then look at applying some new configuration to the device, hardening up the security, enabling brute force protection, enabling an access control list on the router. This type of configuration can be pushed out to individual routers, or you could potentially create a profile which enables those security hardening features and pushing it out to the whole network. Let's look at alarms. So we'll focus on a network now. So let's focus on the root level network. You can be more specific and choose one of the lower level networks that you have. Let's look at the different options that we've got here. You'll notice on the left-hand side that the dashboard menu options have changed, and the dashboard itself obviously no longer displaying a CPE that you've selected. We're now focusing on the network level itself. So the dashboard changes and the options have slightly changed as well on the left-hand side. We get an overview of the status of the network. So we can see there's 5 networks, 6 online, 2 in an alarm state out of the 8 devices that we have. You can also change this to a device view. Giving a quick summary of each device. From here, you can actually go directly to these units or go directly to each of the networks with the links. Very useful option is the monitoring and devices view. So this is an overview of all the devices within the registered Vigor ACS and network selected. Here we can see the actual device name, the IP address, the MAC address of the devices, the model number of each device, which network they're registered to, the status, whether they're online or offline in an alarm state because they haven't registered to Vigor ACS or polled into ACS for a certain amount of time. The uptime, so we can see obviously the offline devices at 0 value, which firmware version is currently applied to those devices. The icons for firmware version as well indicate whether you're on the latest version and it's fully compatible. These devices here have not meeting the naming structure of a valid firmware because they're using beta firmware at the time. So that's why we're getting a question mark on those. And this is a device that could be upgraded as well. The last inform time is very useful because actually you see the activity, and if these are devices that are no longer in use, so they could potentially be removed from Vigor ACS. So those two devices that are offline, the devices there, last inform time that we have is the 8th and the 14th of November. If there's any clients, these devices actually just in demo environment, there's connection via the WAN. There's no LAN clients actually connected to these at the moment. But if you have LAN clients, you can actually see those in place, whether they're wired or wireless clients will be displayed, and the amount of traffic that's actually been generated at each site as well. If we use the wireless tab, we get a bit more information about the SSIDs that are enabled on each device, which channels are in use. So a good way to get an overview of the estate. All this information can be filtered at the top. We can search by a specific IP, MAC address, or device name. Whether it's a certain model type you're interested in, you can focus on that. Online, offline devices, and focus on specific SSIDs as well. Very easy to download a CSV report. So this is something that you could review the data in separately at a later date. Very, very useful menu option. If we focus on a specific network, let's focus on this network here. You can see there's a router in there and a switch. If we look at the monitoring, we can look at additional option here for clients. Any local clients that would be connected, you'd have information of the host name, MAC address, IP, the amount of traffic that's generated as well, and over a period of time that you can filter for. So ACS can show the overall bandwidth for each client, and with additional SD-WAN functionality, which we're not going to cover on today's session, we can actually see the applications that are in use for each of the devices as well. Let's focus on device maintenance in terms of configuration backup and firmware upgrades. The networks that I have in place here, I've put in place some scheduled backups. So if you go to scheduled backup, we have the option of creating multiple profiles. So backup setting profiles here, you can specify for each one that you create the frequency of the backup and the behavior of that backup, how many backups are taken and when the backups are applied. So there's two profiles currently in place here, a daily and a weekly one. If we just edit one here, we can see that the name backup period is every 7 days. We can choose to keep the last 20 backups of the device, or we can choose to keep all configuration files. We can specify the backup time. So currently we've selected schedule. Start time between 8 p.m, end time 10 p.m. So that's a 2-hour window. As long as the devices poll in with a periodic inform between those 2 hours, ACS will take up the backup at that point. So we have two profiles, and this is our network structure that we have for our ACS environment. We can specify which profile is applied to which networks. So as a root level, We've currently got the daily profile applied. So between that 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock window, configuration backups will be taken for all of the devices within the network. So the sub-networks here, company A, B, and C, and also D, are all set as parents. So they'll have the same profile as the root level network. For this specific network here, we're using a different profile, the weekly profile. You also have the option to put more specific or unique profiles per individual device as well. So this option, along with the option of taking backups directly from the dashboard that we spoke of earlier, we can obtain configuration backups of all the devices on the estate. Those backups would be available in the file manager. So in the file manager, we have information of all the devices that we've got. When the backup's generated, the router model and the MAC address will be created as a file name. And within these directories, we can actually see the configuration file that was created. Here we have the option to download those configuration files directly to your device you're accessing Vigor ACS from. Another method of taking the backups is in the system when we're configuring a device. So we're in the CPU dashboard, go to configuration, go to system, and we'll do a backup. Again, another method of doing that backup. We can also here restore configuration files. Restore can also be scheduled from the maintenance menu as well. So firmware upgrades. DrayTek release firmware upgrades for the devices, providing new features, improvements. It's possible to do your upgrades from ACS. We can see currently the device that we're focused on here is currently a 2866, and there's firmware version 4432 currently on the device. From here, we can actually browse through our local directories on the device we're accessing ACS from, select a file and do an upgrade. That upgrade would happen immediately on the device. Any configuration that you do or change within this configuration menu is immediate change, including the firmware upgrade. Or we can actually access firmware in a shared folder. You have the option in the maintenance and file manager to upload firmware into that file manager, so it's available at any point for any user, any valid user for your networks to be able to locate that firmware for any of the devices. Another method for doing a firmware upgrade is via the maintenance. Here we have a firmware upgrade job list. No jobs created at the moment. We can add a new job. This might be for 2866, 4433 firmware. Perhaps that might be the next firmware that's released for the 2866. You can enable or disable the profile, specify the upgrade time. So now, essentially would mean that on the next inform from the CPE, ACS would apply the firmware upgrade at that point. Firmware upgrades do require the device to reboot. So this is often beneficial to enable the scheduled option, specify your start, end time, and even the start date of when this actually happens. And then you select the actual firmware that you want to choose. To which device that you want to actually apply the firmware to. This is where we have the network structure that we have seen before, and we can focus on the 2866, perhaps these two devices that you want to upgrade, or just the one. Saving that as a profile, that will be applied. You can also use a filter option. So if you do have lots of devices in Vigor ACS, the filter option allows you to quickly identify the devices. So you might want to find a device that's currently using 4432 firmware, and they are a 2866. The asterisk is any variant of that. Apply that, and there's our 2866. There's one other method that we'll just cover for firmware upgrades. Under provisioning, there's firmware upgrade as well. This is more of an opportunity to upgrade your devices at a network level. So we can create a profile, again, give it a name. Enable or disable the profile. We have the same controls for the upgrade time. In terms of criteria, here we can specify which model that we're focusing on. So this might be, again, 2866. Any of the variants with the asterisks. And here's where we've got two options. We've got target or current. So if it's target, we want ACS to apply the firmware that we specify. And if the device polls in and it doesn't currently have that firmware, ACS will apply it to the target firmware. Current gives a bit more control of this. We can actually specify it needs to match a certain firmware version before it gets upgraded to the firmware that we specify. So there's a little bit more control of a staggered firmware upgrade path that you might want to apply. Again, we have the option of where we're going to apply this profile to. Rather than having the option before of individual devices, we now have at a network level. So if we wanted this profile to only apply to company B, here's where we would say yes, and we would save that profile. As long as the criteria is matched, the firmware will be upgraded on those devices. So that brings me to the end of this session, covering the agenda of how to add devices into Vigor ACS, certain tips to look out for, monitoring the devices, checking for alerts, device maintenance, configuration backups, and firmware upgrade. So I think we'll now move on to the questions. So I think during this webinar, the questions may have been collated.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming through. So we'll answer them, I think, as they came in. So the first question we've got is, how do you turn off the offline notifications for devices and routers?
So ACS will detect if a device is not polling in, so it generates those alarms. The alarms for the devices will be in monitoring and alarms. So this is the view from ACS. We've got the any information of active alarms or historical alarms. I think the question is more related to the ability, ACS has the ability of sending a notification of when these type of events happen. This is something that is controlled from the user group management setup. So you can request, we've got this notifications events as well. Here we can actually disable some of the options that we've got for email notification. And this is also, there's additional controls on the user group management level. So if you're using the cloud environment, which I currently have a login at the moment, my login is a group administrator, so I don't have access to all the functionality. But there is some functionality for system admin user level to disable for the user group, anyone that's part of the user group, because you might have a group administrator and different user profiles with different privileges. At group level, we can enable or disable the email notifications. So that would be, if you're using the cloud environment, I'd recommend actually contacting the support and requesting that those are disabled if that's not what you want.
Excellent. So we've got another question from Philip. You may need to clarify on this, Philip, in the questions, but you've put, what is the blank slot on the graph? I'm not sure which graph we're at that stage. So Philip, if you're able to just clarify where we were, we could probably get that answered. The next question is...
I'll just add to that, Billy. So the graph information here is typically built up with the regular informs from a device. If a device is offline at any point, the WAN connection's down, power's down, that you would potentially see any kind of gaps in the graph there because there's no data that's been collected by the server to populate that information for that time. So potentially that might have been the cause of any graphs that we might have seen.
Okay, yeah, Philip's clarified saying on the first router. So I'm assuming it's this one that we're on at the moment. If not, Philip's... Okay.
Perhaps this one.
Yes, I think it must be dropouts there when we're
yeah. So
okay, that gap there. So that's with the polling, is it?
Yeah, so as I say, that's built up. There's a separate database on the ACS server for all the graphing information that's available, and yeah, potentially here the device might have been powered off or the WAN connection was down at that point potentially.
Okay, yeah, Philip's saying he gets a few of those. So Philip, maybe we'll contact support and we can have a look at that and see what's happening with those. What's the next question? Is there an option to have multiple email servers? I'm assuming for the notifications on this one.
The email servers that we can have, we can do it per user group. I think it's only one per user group currently on this.
Okay, perfect. We've got Rob again asking, we're on the ACS 2 platform. How do we move to ACS 3? I'm assuming he's looking for some sort of migration.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a self-hosted question, you know, ACS you can have a cloud environment access, or if you've got a self-hosted server. If you're currently on Vigor ACS 2, we can provide guidance on upgrading to Vigor ACS 3. Do contact our support team. They'll give you some information on that. You know, there's key information to know what current ACS 2 version you're on. You know, quite likely we would recommend that you be on a minimum version of ACS 2 before you do the upgrade. And obviously make sure we do all our backups before you do that migration. But yeah, it is possible, and do contact the support teams.
Excellent. I've got a question saying, can you create multiple groups using the cloud product, or is it just a feature of the self-hosted version? Again, I'm not sure at which stage you're on the group section.
Yeah, so this is a feature of the self-hosted Vigor ACS. So essentially, user group provides the ability to segment access to different networks and different environments in the ACS. So ACS can be used as like a multi-tenanted environment for managing lots of different customers, and when you provide access to the ACS, those users can be given specific access to a certain user group, which would have visibility of only select networks. So having that kind of control of that multi-tenanted environment is only available on the self-hosted.
Okay, perfect. I think that ties in with his next question saying, can you display all monitored devices on the same screen? I'm assuming in some sort of NOC environment. For example, as a colored block box displaying device name that changes color depending on the connection status. This would be helpful for displaying on a large screen in a support environment.
So the dashboards, there's certain information on dashboards, but if there's other information that you would like to get or display it in some sort of different way, the Vigor ACS does have an API. So if you had a self-hosted environment, you'd be able to connect up to that API and pull off any information that you wanted and display it in how you want it on your dashboard. But yeah, other than that, there's the dashboards that are available on the ACS platform itself.
Perfect. We've got one saying backup settings. If the network is set as parent, do all devices back up, or individual files, or one total file?
So that's the question related to the scheduled backup, I believe. So this was the example that we had here.
Yeah.
I think the question is related to if it's applied to a network level. So there's two at the moment. We've got two profiles, one for this one here where there's two devices within it, and this one in total there's 8, but it would just be these 6 because they're currently as parents that would apply to that one here. They would be individual files for that. As the devices come in to the ACS with the periodic informs, and the criteria is matched for the time of day that the backup should be taken, a new backup configuration file will be created for each one.
Okay, perfect. I think the last question here we've got is what costs are we looking at for ACS, and is there a free version, say, for dealers?
So we have, in terms of costing, I think we'll send out something after this session in terms of pricing, just to give everyone the correct pricing. But I think it's around £6 a node. When I say a node, ACS has a number of licenses that you need to actually have available on the server. It's a pool of licenses, so it's not linked to a specific device at all. Once a device comes into ACS, if there's an available license in the pool, the device can be managed, will appear in ACS and can be managed from ACS. If the device is later deleted, that license becomes available again for any additional devices that register in the future. So in the cloud environments, I think it's around the £6 a node, and we'll send out a pricing. Let's just give up-to-date pricing information on that. The other question was I'm sorry, just to add on the licensing before I forget, the devices themselves, routers will class as one license. If you have a switch or an access point in ACS, they actually take up less requirement. They're half a license each they take up. So it helps if you've got large estate of access points or switches. You don't necessarily have to buy as many licenses for that to cover that. The other question was, is there a free version? There has previously been a free version. I think that's being reviewed at the moment. So not currently at the moment there's any kind of new registrations to the ACS cloud standard free environment, which was a bit of a pared back feature set of what the cloud premium solution we're accessing today.
Okay.
Any more kind of updates on that will come in the future about what's happening with the cloud standard. But as of yet, I believe no more registrations are being accepted on that.
Okay, perfect. We've got another question from Philip saying we have noticed that on the 3910, the ACS is not reporting correctly on 4.3.2.5 and 6. I'm assuming we'll lead them towards support on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we'll follow up. Sounds like specific firmware. They want to cover something about ACS management of the device. So yeah, we'll definitely look into that. If you have a support ticket, please raise one, and we'll follow up with that.
Okay, that's all the questions we've got so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Billy. I think we'll end that there. If there's any other questions that do come in, we can get an email response to those. But thank you very much to everyone.